Alrighty, Ellen, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is now 4:01. We're missing a couple of people, but you can let them in. Is that right, as time goes on? Luna? Can you let people in?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the meeting's been called to order, and now we need a roll call, please.
Chair Bailey,
Here.
Vice Chair Minor,
Here.
Member Smith,
Here.
Member Hennett, Member Atkinson, Member Holmes,
Here.
Member Caston.
Here.
Great.
Thank you.
See everybody. I think we all met last time, so we don't need to do introductions again. Although I don't know, Scott, were you introduced last time?
No, this is my first meeting.
Okay, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm Scott Alonso. I work for the City of Santa Rosa, Intergovernmental Relations and Legislative Officer, and I'll be presenting in a few minutes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so just so you know that we should keep unless we're speaking, we should keep our selves muted at all times, just because, all sorts of things pop up in our families and our offices. As members of the public join the meeting, they will be participating as an attendee, and their microphones and camera will be muted. Only today's panelists will be viewed during the meeting. If you're calling in from a telephone and choose to speak during public comments, the public comments portion of today's agenda, for privacy concerns, the host will be renaming your viewable number to resident and the last 4 digits of your phone number. And now if our recording secretary could explain how public comments will be heard at today's meeting, that would be helpful.
At each agenda item, the item is presented. The chair will ask for committee members' comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the chair is called for public comment, the chair will announce for the public to raise their hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial 9 to raise your hand. The host will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes, and a timer will appear on the screen for the committee members and public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will read emails submitted. If you provide a live public comment on an agenda item, but also submitted an email, your email comment will not be read during the meeting. Additionally, there is 1 public comment period on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda matters, which is item 2. This is the time when any person may address the committee on matters not listed on this agenda.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to item 2, public comment on non-agenda items, stating that we are now taking public comments, and this is a time when any person may address the committee on matters not listed on this agenda. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. And if you're dialing in by telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. And our host is checking to see if anyone is requesting to speak.
I'm seeing no hands raised, and there were no public comments received via email.
Great, thank you very much. Well, let's move on to item 3 then, the approval of minutes from our last meeting. Could someone, I'm assuming the committee members all read the minutes from our last meeting, and if you could, someone could make a motion to accept them, that would be great. If you have changes, please let us know.
I'll move approval.
Great, and now we need a second.
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go on to scheduled items now. Number 4.1, the Measure O update and public education outreach. We will review public education outreach materials and potential ballot measure for November 2022. The recommended action, this is really just information only. And my understanding is there will be no voting on anything. It's just for information. There'll be time for questions and or comments from the members of the committee and obviously the public. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Great, thank you very much. So now I turn it over to Scott, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bailey, Vice Chair Minor, and other members of the committee. Good afternoon. Good to be here. I've actually sat in your shoes with the vice chair with the library tax oversight committee. I used to be a member of that for many years. So now I'm on the other side. So look forward to presenting this information with you. We have some other city staff here that will kind of be rotating through a brief PowerPoint presentation. And then we're going to leave plenty of time for questions and comments to receive. So just as a starting point, before we kind of dive into this presentation, is really the context for why we're here today. And the city council last year approved an effort to engage the public on Measure O and what Measure O has been funding since its inception when it was passed by the voters in 2004. The tax does expire. And so that is why the council is considering placing a measure on the ballot in November 2022. Although no decision has been made yet, that'll occur later this summer. So we're really here talking about what Measure O has been doing, as you all very well know, but really to hear from you as well in terms of what your feedback is, what a measure may look like, and the like. So we really want to listen to the community. And this committee is actually the first formal presentation we've done as part of our public education and outreach initiative, which is why we wanted to meet with you all first. We're going to be having additional meetings actually starting next week. We're going to be hosting with members of the council town hall events in each of their districts. So there's an event on April 14th and an event on April 19th, and we can get into that later on, but just wanted to flag that for you all. We're also meeting with other community groups, neighborhood associations, and certainly if you have any feedback on that, we'd love to hear it in terms of which particular groups you feel like we should be reaching out to or communicating with. So just wanted to provide that. We also have a website with a lot of information on Measure O, and that website is srcity.org/Measure O, and that'll take you to our page that has information about our events that are coming up starting next week, and additional information about the tax and what the money is spent on. So with that, I think I'll start the PowerPoint, and then we'll kind of roll through this, and then again leave time for questions for staff to answer. So as you know, Measure O was approved by the voters in Santa Rosa in 2004. It was a 1/4 cent sales tax. It was dedicated funding for 3 buckets. So police and fire and violence prevention programs, which includes our recreation department. The Measure O annually currently funds over 25 firefighters, paramedics, and police personnel, and that includes non-sworn peace officers with SRPD. And at about an annual basis, Measure O provides funding for over 400,000 hours of youth and mental health services, public health, gang prevention, and social services. And so that's under that violence prevention umbrella with our recreation team as well, and our Office of Community Engagement. So that's sort of the broad overview. As you know, when you last met in January, you looked at you presented to the council last December, your annual report. So I think you're all pretty familiar with that, but this is just a broad overview. And next we'll turn to the police department, and Captain John Cregan will provide some information there.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thanks, Chair Bailey and the rest of the committee for allowing us to talk about the Measure O and some of the work that we're doing. For the police department, the stats that we had right here for the last stats that were issued were for 2020, and the Santa Rosa Police Department received over 203,000 calls for service that came into through our dispatch center and through our non-emergency lines, including just over 72,000 of those were emergency 911 calls for service that came in through the 911 dispatch center. Some of the things that Measure O have allowed us to do over the years is certainly to put an increase in our patrol services. And right now we have 16 funded positions of the police department that are funded by Measure O. So a big portion of those are dedicated to our patrol services, which assist us in responding to local emergencies. And the key part of that as we prepare for another upcoming fire season is the police department has the lead responsibility for the citywide evacuations that we have during our wildfires that we unfortunately have become almost an annual occurrence here in the city of Santa Rosa. Also, some of the efforts that we put through Measure O are enhancing some of our traffic enforcement And one of the bigger issues we've been seeing right now is the increasing frequency of sideshows. And we're learning how staff intensive these are and the number of resources we need to be able to safely respond to these and be able to start curbing some of the dangerous sideshow activity here in our city. And another big focus of our Measure O resources has been increasing the downtown and the presence in our downtown core, not only with our downtown enforcement officers, which work very collaboratively with some of our other city departments and some of our other local nonprofits here in Santa Rosa, but also specifically funded through Measure O of our downtown substation, which is part of the transit, downtown transit op center that we have downtown. But for us, it's going to be looking forward, where do we go with the future of Measure O? And some of the focuses that we're going to have is on increasements with our community engagement, with our violence reduction, and continuing to see where we can increase with some of our things with our traffic safety. And another big presence that we want to look at is increasing substations around the city so we can have more publicly accessible substations. And one of our goals is certainly in the Rosen area to be able to have a public facing substation that we're able to open, and we could have Spanish speaking staff and brochures in Spanish there in the Rosen area. And that's something that's a priority for us to be able to look at some of those things we can do as we look at the future of Measure O here for the Santa Rosa Police Department. And I'll turn it back over to you, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Captain Cregan, for that overview. And again, the captain will be here throughout the whole afternoon to answer any questions that may come up after our brief presentation. And next, I want to turn over to our fire chief, Chief Westrup, who can review some of the funding related to the fire department.
Thanks, Scott, and good afternoon, Chair Bailey and members of the committee. Scott Westrup, Fire Chief for the City of Santa Rosa. So the fire department has historically used Measure O for three main veins. It is people, stations, and equipment. So obviously we used Measure O funds to construct fire stations and relocate fire stations, and we've hired both firefighters and firefighter paramedics with Measure O funds. As you know, historically we replaced Station 5, or we rebuilt Station 5, built Station 10, and built Station 11 with Measure O funds. That goes back a bit. Obviously Station 5 is working on rebuilding that one right now, but we strategically place these fire stations to where they meet our response times the best. And just for a point of reference, to sort of match what Santa Rosa PD was talking about, we responded to a little over 28,000 calls for service in 2021. So for our size, we're a very busy fire department. And our main goal is to put emergency response personnel and equipment in the right place at the right time to really respond to 911 calls and to emergency events. Some of the things we're looking at is the future relocation of Station 8 in Roseland from Burbank Avenue to Hearn Avenue, and then eventually building Station 9 in the southeast as well. So we built the stations with it. We've purchased equipment with it. Recently, the committee authorized the purchase of new mobile radios for all of our equipment, which will be a huge enhancement to our fleet and to our communication capabilities. We've bought fire engines with it, and we have 10.25 positions assigned to Measure O. So Measure O is very vital to us. The 10.25 positions essentially equate to an entire engine company, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But our engines have 3 people on them over 3 shifts. So to put a fire station in service, we need 9 people to keep a fire station in service. So that 10.25 number to us is very important because it equates to a little over an entire engine company. So that's it for us until we get to questions. I'll turn it back over to Scott.
Great. Thanks, Chief, for that. And last, we'll hear from Jeff and Magali about the violence prevention program and funding in addition to our recreation department.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Magali Theus, Director of Community Engagement, and I also oversee the Violence Prevention Partnership. Jeff Tibbetts and I will be presenting the slide, and I'll just start off with some information about, so historically, the Santa Rosa Violence Prevention Partnership has been a collaborative effort of over 50 organizations focused on strengthening youth and families and creating safe and resilient neighborhoods through various upstream approaches. And part of, what recently has shifted in our community includes a greater acknowledgement for root problems like systemic racism, a lack of equity, and poverty. This idea that there are deep roots under our social problems is an example that the partnerships has been uplifting as part of its work in the past few years. And through some of this work, we've been partnering quite a bit with various agencies where we learned that the violence is rooted in the social structures that exist in Santa Rosa. And for example, we've a number of times named the 10 roots of violence, where we find that, things like families with poor access to health and mental health services, or to some extent, violence has been normalized, and prevention services overall has been lacking. So taking sort of all of that information, trying to connect community to various resources. And with that, I'll send it over to Jeff to talk about a little bit more about how we're meeting, recreation is meeting some of these needs.
Thank you, Magali, and good to see everybody again. Good afternoon. Jeff Tibbetts, I'm the Deputy Director with the Recreation Division, and the division houses the Neighborhood Services section, which offers youth programs through Measure O funds. So as Magali mentioned, it's the upstream approach. So what Recreation is looking to do with the funding that we have is offer programs that would be categorized more in your primary and secondary prevention category, generally a bigger safety net cast out to provide services to youth and families, and start to build relationships, start to identify children who maybe and families who need additional services. So these programs, I know this group's very familiar with them. We've reported on them a lot. They're after school programs, extracurricular sports, dance teams, those types of activities for kids. They're break camps, summer camps, all that type of programming. Something else that's certainly unique is this is through Measure O. There's some flexibility and some ability to us to constantly be assessing what the need is and to adjust the best that we can to that. Obviously, a great example of that is through the pandemic and the closure of the schools and the distance learning, using Measure O to reallocate programs that couldn't run during that time and to house the School of Rec, which was the distance learning assistance program, and identifying through the school districts children who didn't have the support or resources or supervision at home to navigate distance learning well, and bringing them in and providing them that support. So that's a brief overview, kind of recreation with the goal of those programmings that we offer. But that's only kind of, it truly takes a village, and that's just the one piece of it. So I'll pass back to Magali in terms of when everything is working well is when we have that big safety net out there. We have those primary prevention, that upstream approach, but we're able to identify, and then there's another team that's ready to help support the youth and the families when that's needed. And so I'll pass to Magali to talk a little bit more about the Choice Grant program.
Thank you, Jeff. And yes, more about our community helping our indispensable children excel, also known as our Choice Grant program. We've been able to move the needle in some areas, make progress, and document that progress, and report out to the community via our 2020 report and various other events that we've held where we've done some outreach with communities. So, for example, we've been able to provide information to community like with our partner agency, LifeWorks of Sonoma County, who are a mental health services provider in the community, and one of our agencies that we fund. We found that 93% of their participants that they serve through our grant program showed a reduction in risk-taking behavior like gang involvement, violence, and substance abuse. And another example with our REACH program, which is directly in the juvenile hall, we found that 99% of the youth avoided incarceration while enrolled in the REACH program. And again, these are just 2 of our 10 agencies that we're funding and programs that we're funding to sort of collectively look at how can we join forces with community organizations, with direct service providers. In addition to some of that work, as of late, we started doing some of our own internal school outreach programs. Since coming out of sheltering in place, there's been a big uptake in community violence, and our team has been responding to that to the extent that we can with the size of a team, the team that we have in collaboration with our superintendents, service providers to provide resources and wraparound services to the community members and victims of some of our most recent activities that we've seen in the community. And essentially, I also just really want to point out the importance of some of the work that we've also been able to do is make sure that we're aligned with trauma-informed care. Today, we participated in the Hannah Institute as a team. Captain Cregan joined us in one of the workshops that we were asked to lead. And tomorrow we are going to be hosting another trauma-informed intensive workshop on the margins. So I did want to point out the importance of our continued work with being trauma-informed. So I will send it back to Scott. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Director Tejas and Director Tibbetts, for all that information about the great work happening there. And yeah, excited to see that. So yeah, we just wanted to talk about potential cuts to public safety and neighborhood services and violence prevention if Measure O, which is set to expire in 2025. And so if that does expire, you know, potentially there would be a loss of approximately $10 million a year in annual funding to Measure O programs and public safety funding. So we're looking at potentially on firefighters, paramedics, police officers that could be laid off. Services could be cut or limited for youth and families, and those programs that Jeff and Magali just outlined. You know, fire stations could close based on, as Chief Westrop stated, on how many positions are funded by Measure O and what's needed to staff a full station. And then additionally, you know, 911 emergency response times could be impacted in addition to police response times for violent crime. So those are the potential outcomes if Measure O is expired without any renewal. And so that's what we wanted to convey, which you all know very well, given your role here. But this is part of the information we're conveying to the community as part of this public education and outreach initiative that we're doing over the next few months up until the summer. So. And then next slide, please. And then, you know, what a renewal could mean for Santa Rosa, you know, if Measure O at current allocations would be renewed, would be able to reduce the risk of wildfires. We can increase community preparedness, our early alert systems, and how we plan for evacuations and recovery. We can maintain our fire services and prevent the closure of stations. We can continue to have rapid 911 response and meet those national standards. And we can continue to provide resources for youth and their families and violence prevention efforts, in addition to those choice grants that a lot of our local community-based organizations and nonprofits apply for and receive funding to continue to help our community. And then again, just lastly, again, the impact on staffing levels if Measure O were to go away. If it is renewed, you know, that would prevent those reductions in firefighters, paramedics, and police officers. All right, next slide. And then, as you know, since you're the Oversight Committee, you know, we do have mandatory fiscal accountability in the current measure, which requires a Citizens Oversight Committee, audits and yearly reports to the community. And as I mentioned earlier, you did that and the council received that last December for your annual report, and that all money raised would be controlled locally and restricted for public safety services only. And no money could be taken away by other state governments in Sacramento. And there is no money for city administrator salaries in the current Measure O language. And that lastly, the essential purchases like groceries and prescription medicine are exempt from the quarter-cent sales tax. So it's not an undue burden on those fixed or limited incomes. So those are all items in the current measure. And certainly when the council considers this later this summer, that's a big piece that they'll weigh in on in terms of what future oversight would look like. So with that is the end of the presentation. I think we wanted to open it up for comments, take public comment, and certainly try to address any questions that committee members have. And again, I just want to emphasize that no decision has been made by the council. We're working as staff to get feedback from the community so that the council can make an informed decision in July when they consider placing a potential measure on the ballot in November of 2022. And so really, we're just here to hear from you and other community members as we begin our robust outreach process. So again, but we're here to hear that feedback. So we'd love to get that. We will take the feedback to the council. There are additional steps we are taking. We're going to be creating an online survey on our city website to hear from community members. There will be additional outreach materials being sent to folks via mail pieces. There'll be additional public opinion polling in a few months as well, all leading up to when the council has to make that determination in July and August, because there are deadlines under the law on when a local government can place a ballot measure on the ballot for a general election. So that's why we have those deadlines in place. So, and thank you, Chair. And yeah, we're happy to continue this conversation and again, hear from the public as well.
Thank
Okay.
you, everybody. I really appreciate all the information. I have two questions. One is, can you give us a list of the organizations you're already planning on speaking to, or would you prefer that we just make suggestions about those? Because there's so many places you could speak. That's one question. And then the other is, once you've gathered information from the public, what's the process for deciding what happens with that information and what changes may or may not be made? Who makes that decision and what's the process for that? I think that would be helpful for all of us to know.
Yeah, I think to your first question, we have started to reach out to various nonprofits, neighborhood associations. We're hearing back from some. We've already had a few scheduled, like the Oakmont Rotary. We're going in June. We're speaking with the North Bay Leadership Council in a few weeks. We've reached out to other groups as well. But we're certainly happy to hear feedback on that. So this is certainly, I would think, an appropriate time for committee members to let us know, who we should be reaching out to in their neighborhoods or council districts. So yeah, we're certainly open to that feedback. And part of what we're also doing with those town halls with council members is really those are the neighborhood level engagement efforts where folks can interact with their council member. They'll hear a presentation similar to what you all just heard, and certainly to have that dialogue with the community. And again, those are on April 14th and April 19th, and they both start at 6 p.m. The April 14th town hall is with Mayor Rogers at the Finley Center, and that'll be at 6. And then on April 19th, that'll be with Councilmember Fleming, and that'll be at Santa Rosa High School in the multipurpose room. And that's also going to be at 6 p.m. And again, all that information's on that website I mentioned earlier. We're going to do social media outreach on that too. And I think we've created a Facebook event today and a flyer promoting those town halls. And we're going to do those town halls in May and June as well with the other council members. So you'll see more information. And the plan will be in Southwest Santa Rosa to do a fully, hopefully monolingual event in Spanish only. And that we'll do another bilingual event in English and Spanish. So we're trying to be strategic, certainly about which neighborhoods and how we convey information and how we receive information. So that's certainly at top of mind for our staff as well. But I think to your second point, Chair Bailey, part of what we need to do as staff is gather that feedback, and then we will eventually prepare a formal report to the council in July, outlining all the steps we've taken since we started this process a couple of weeks ago internally here. So certainly that's going to be who we've met with, who we've talked with, and what they've said to us, certainly. And that's all going to be really important. And we want to try to summarize those key themes, right, on what we're hearing from the community. And certainly, I think we'll hear shortly, some of the discussion points will certainly be on the allocation, right, on what currently Measure O funds, how long the tax measure would be for, and what amount. So those are all big questions, and those are questions for the council, as the policymakers for the city. So we're trying to take all that feedback in and report that back out.
Can I ask a question? This is Andrew Smith. Scott, I have only been living in Santa Rosa since July of 2010. What brought this Measure O about almost 18 years ago? Well, what was going on in Santa Rosa since like I say, my time only started 2010. I mean, was there a lot of crime? Was it, what brought it on? I think the education there would be very helpful to people to know about it, because it's been very successful for almost 18 years, and it's kind of like almost invisible. You know, you go to the store, you pay your sales tax on it. No one asks, oh, it's going to Measure O. So maybe somebody could, tell us, and especially me, what brought this on. That would be appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for that. I have only been with the city for a few months as staff, so I wouldn't be best positioned necessarily to answer that. So I don't know if any other staff want to jump in on that, but I think from my understanding, it was a recognition by our former city manager, Jeff Colin, and our police department and fire departments, really on funding levels. And just there was a concern over, annual appropriations. And again, Measure O cannot supplant general fund. So, that has to be completely separate, and they have to be completely different buckets of funding streams. So I believe that was one of the reasons why the council in 2004 placed it on the ballot, and ultimately, why the voters enacted to pass it. But I'd certainly want other staff to weigh in.
I can weigh in. I'm certainly Chief Westrope can as well. I mean, one important thing is we were seeing such a community-wide issue with some of the gang issues that were coming up that time and violence in our community. And our community really got together saying a phrase that we've used often in some of these conversations is, we learned that this is a community-wide issue and going to take a community-wide response. And it was very clear that we're not going to arrest our way out of the gang problems, that we needed to put more resources, dedicate more law enforcement towards some of the education piece of it, some of the gang prevention part of it. And that was the catalyst for the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force, as it was called at the time when it first created. And Chair Bailey played such a key role in being able to get that off the ground and incorporate it. And we saw, what do we need to do to bring police and our violence prevention resources together as a community to start addressing some of the violence. And we've seen incredible progress over the years. And we've seen so much that's done with the fire department. I'll let Chief Westrup talk about that. And we've seen more and more of that need as the wildfires become such a daily or yearly part of our lives here.
Yeah, from a fire department's perspective, it was much of the same. There was a need for catalyst change in the funding of public safety, and from the fire department perspective, that was, we needed to build fire stations, we needed to staff fire stations, we needed to buy additional equipment. So it was a big change for us, and obviously we've opened a lot of stations now. I'll say that the cost of building a fire station and the cost of personnel have outrun where Measure O is when it was funded in 2004. So things have changed quite drastically, but it still provides us with the additional funding that we need outside of the general fund to complete our mission.
Are there more questions or?
Yes, there are. So one of the questions I have in relation to the engagement piece, which I like to say DEI compliant, I want to know, is there anything in place where you will be reaching out to specific areas, people of color, because in the past, they have not been at the table to have a conversation in this capacity. And so considering all the things that happened in the last 2 years, I want to make sure that we're not just sending people to the website or sending them to a Zoom. I think people need to go back into the community and have these conversations and making sure that people of color is being heard and also put into this process. And so one of the things that's an issue with the community as a whole is the fact they want to see more diversion programs and not so much the police being funded. So more money going into Parks and Recs or, the wraparound services that the prevention offer. So in the event that the community comes back and say, we don't want to see funding going to this particular agency, are all of your agencies taking a look at what could you do in the event this doesn't go through? Is anybody taking a look at what you're going to be doing next in the event that this doesn't go through? And so those are a couple of the questions I have, and definitely I have here data from previous. Data, we have some data that the police collected 2 years ago. That is something that could be looked at to look at how to better improve the programs that people would say, I can get behind this. So taking a look at that data you have previously collected and add that into what we're doing today And as we're moving forward, making sure that we hear from the public, because again, not everybody's going to be able to go to Zoom. So we need to have a concerted effort for those technological people that cannot work in technology. You have to have a plan for that. So what do you have in place for that?
So Scott, I can talk to some of those questions. Member Minor, 100%, everything that you said is incredibly important and something that we've had in mind as we're developing these outreach strategies, right? Is like, you know, we can't do we're gonna offer this outreach opportunity and then get everybody a headset and try to do it in Spanish. And, you know, it's like we're in a different place now, as you said, like, you know, because of everything that's happened in the last 2 years, we have to show up differently. And that is with the intentionality, especially with our monolingual Spanish community. I think the intentionality comes with providing a full, like 100%, as Scott mentioned, in Spanish opportunity to engage, so that, you know, it's also an opportunity for folks on the city side or council members who are not fluent in another language to sort of also understand the experience that's happening for community members when having to have information translated, right? And we are also looking at going into community and not just holding everything at the Finley Center or not just holding everything at City Hall, but going out into the various neighborhoods. We are looking into holding space at schools or, you know, safe spaces where community that have been hubs for communities. So you asked so many great questions, and I want to make sure I didn't forget any of the questions. So, but in the meantime, I don't know if the rest of the team wants to chime in as I try to remember some of. I should have wrote down some of your questions.
I'll slow down next time.
Well, I think one of the, and thanks Magali for that. I think the vice chair's question about what the departments would do if they don't receive the funding and how are they thinking about that. So that's a big question. I would refer to our individual departments, but you know, I think part of that's why we included that in the slide of potential cuts. You know, what could happen potentially if the funding's not there, but certainly the council and the departments would have to adapt to that and be strategic about how they would face that potentially. So I don't know if the chief or the captain have anything else to add on that piece.
Sorry, I just want to jump in really quick because the Violence Prevention Partnership is the only department within Measure O that doesn't have general fund funding. So if Measure O went away, we would no longer have the staff that we have, and we would no longer have the funds to fund the multiple agencies that assist us. And I feel very passionate about this. So sorry, Chief, I'm like totally cutting you off because I know you wanted to say something. But what we've been finding in these recent community incidences is one, overall, as many of you know, we have a lack of bilingual, bicultural mental health providers. And through the Measure O grant, the Choice grant, we're able to partner with LifeWorks, which has been such a crucial partner in many of these incidences that have happened in the community. We've been able to tap on LifeWorks and say, hey, there was an incident that happened in this neighborhood. We really need to get some mental health services out to community. With our wraparound coordinator, we've been able to schedule Uber rides. So if people don't have you know, a way to get to LifeWorks, we can get them there. And we've been sending Gustavo Mendoza and Danny Chaparro out to the middle schools, to the high schools, doing outreach. So without the funding, we no longer have the mechanism to call on our crisis response team that we've developed through with our partners who are doing direct services. And we're no longer able to fund agencies like the REACH program who are doing really phenomenal work right inside the juvenile hall, creating, I mean, they're super trauma informed. They're super heavy on, you know, celebration of cultural wealth. So I just really want to press upon like that whole section of Measure O would be gone. Like we just wouldn't have that staff and support. And I'll just put a pin in it for now.
And Vice Chair, you know, and thinking about your question, I go back to the very first day of EMT school that I walked into in 1992. And the first lesson we learned was anticipate the best, but expect the worst. So I've always based our strategic planning off of that mindset of, it's logical that, Measure O will get, reformed and passed and everything's going to be great and we're going to be right back on track. But as strategic planners, quite frankly, we talk about it at least on a weekly, if not daily basis, what's going to happen if Measure O doesn't pass and we have to absorb or figure out what we're going to do with the $10 million delta. So I'm sorry, for us, or the $3 million delta. So, we definitely are thinking about it. We're going to have to get really crafty in how we maintain our response levels and response times and service to the community with that shortfall. But, hopefully we don't get there, but we are definitely thinking about it and planning for it.
Yes, and the same for the police department. We have 16 funded positions in there, and it's spread out of some of our vital operations with our downtown enforcement team, with our traffic officers, with our field evidence technicians that all have crucial roles, with our communications dispatchers that we have. So it's would be felt throughout the department, and I think you'd feel the impacts of some of these specialty teams with traffic and downtown, and especially this year as we focus on an increased focus on community engagement. And with some of the violence suppression that we have to do in our streets. We had our third homicide of the year this year, all three firearms related homicides, and we're barely into the first quarter of the year. And that's not the community that we want to have here in Santa Rosa. And we want to be able to have more safety for our residents and for our community. And so these are some of the things that we want Measure O to be a key part of some of that violence reduction, and then really working with community engagement and the Violence Prevention Partnership on some of the root causes. So we never see some of our young people involved in some of these violent incidents that change lives for all, for the victims and for the young men and women who are involved as on the perpetrator side of these incidents.
And to address that on the recreation side, I think Magali brought up a good point with the other funding sources. And so neighborhood services does have some general fund funding that would still be there, and within recreation as a whole, I'm looking at that as a whole division. There's obviously some strategies and things that we're looking at, as well as some other funding sources. So we've got partnerships with Burbank Housing. We have Change for Kids Fund, which is the roundup of utility bills. So we do have some other things, and we are looking at programs and how they're structured and how they're set up, so that if Measure O does go away when it is set to expire, how are we set up to continue and maintain and make sustainable as many of the programs as we can? But certainly there's going to be a huge impact of programs that doors will close, programs won't be offered. So there's a lot of that strategy going into it. Like I said, one of the things we look at being is flexible with community needs. So while we are setting up and taking some strategic looks at what those steps look like, to say right now exactly what I think those programs would be, I think we've all learned that in a couple of years, too many factors change to say this is the program that we're going to run in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. So trying to set ourselves up strategically where we'll be able to adapt. The other piece, I think, again, is not just looking at neighborhood services as its own section, but it is a part of recreation. And I think there's some strategic things that we do with recreation, with or without Measure O proceeding, that help in terms of more emphasis on our scholarship program potentially, which is really focused on, for the most part, swim lessons. But maybe that's a piece to really try to invest in and build up our scholarship program, where maybe we're sending more kids to camps and signing up more kids for other, traditional recreation programs. But again, these are strategies to try to plug as many holes as we can, but there certainly would be an impact of a loss of programs if Measure O was not renewed.
Any other questions from folks?
Yeah, I think we've all been raising our hand with the raise hand function too. So if someone can track that, that'd be good. But I think I'm next. So I want to start with some comments, and I do have some questions. But first off, I just want to say I appreciate everyone's description of you going through the fiduciary duty of figuring out what happens if this doesn't pass. But I'm rooting for the best, and that we're going to put this on either in 2022 or 2024 and pass it and not have a loss of funding. And I hope that we can maintain both of those mindsets, one for the fiscal conservatives and the other for us hopeful folk. And I just want to point out a few things that have happened in the community in the last couple of weeks, I guess a month or so, that I think are exactly what all the departments should keep doing. First off, Chief Navarro was able to come and speak at the Cesar Chavez Language Academy on Sebastopol Road to all the second graders there. And I know that was a big impact. And it was great having the police department out at the Cesar Chavez Day Festival at the same campus. And then also seeing the police department and the fire department show up for the West Side Little League opening ceremonies this last weekend. And I think the more that you guys can be doing, clearly you're out there, and these are like the first big community events we've had down here in the Southwest, with folks showing up, and having you all there real early on, I think is just going to be exactly the type of momentum we need to see this get renewed. So, just thank your staffs for their efforts to be there and be present. My biggest concern, and Scott, I addressed this with you earlier today, is making sure that anything goes forward has strong financial protections to make sure that the funds can't be captured by other jurisdictions. And the reason this is a concern is the fire sales tax initiative that the county ran, I believe it was 2 years ago now, created a funding formula that would have specifically captured our revenue by setting our baseline funding for the allocation of those new funds with the inclusion of Measure O. And if Measure O were not to pass again, that funding formula would not have been restructured. So we would have had a loss of funds from the new funding as well as loss of funds from the current one. And essentially what it was doing was attempting to take funds from jurisdictions like ours and several other fire districts in the county and send them to jurisdictions that hadn't passed their own funding initiatives. And I know this is a little complex, but I think we need to be able to be very serious with the citizens when we go back out for renewal, and being clear that that type of a scheme can't be used again, and that language is included to protect us from seeing any attempts by other jurisdictions to essentially utilize the extra funding that we've approved to deny us access to funds that we would otherwise get. So I don't know if that's a question. It's more of a comment. But I think it's incredibly important for those fiscal protections to have that there. I also wanted to mention, in concern specifically with the public safety funding and kind of the things that I've seen Measure O do over the last 20 years. And I was related to the campaign back in 2004, volunteered on it while I was doing some other work, and I've seen the impacts. And I recall there was a time when we gave grants to the school systems to start a restorative justice program. I believe it came out of the violence prevention, or I think at that time it was gang prevention funds, and the numbers were astonishing. I think it was like an 80% reduction in suspensions and expulsions from that impact of seeding that program and working collaboratively with the schools. And I know that unfortunately the school district's not collaborating with us anymore on the school resource officers program, but school resource officers being able to be present and be in building those early relationships with kids in the schools, or I should say kids anywhere, has been an incredibly important part of the public safety funding face to the public. And I'd like to see, however we describe the SRO program in the future ballot initiative, that we do it so that it's not specifically designed to be reliant on a contract with another jurisdiction, but instead that we're looking at making sure that those patrol resources are going into officers who are trained to work with youth, and that we're engaging those officers into the youth wherever we're welcome, and however we need to, but that we don't see something like we saw over the last few years, right when we're reopening all the schools, and all of a sudden this resource isn't there because of a decision that was outside of our control as a city. So the restructuring of that line item specifically is to, instead of say school resource officers, say something along the lines of, youth trained officers, or something that just really sends that home, I think is important, because so much relies on that early interaction, that early trust building between the folks that are in uniforms and there to keep us safe and not. And I'd also say, let's not discount the importance of those public safety things as we're talking about engaging with the public. I got sideshows 2 blocks from my house. pretty much every weekend right now. We have a homeless encampment a block away that includes things from improperly installed propane tanks to gray water tanks under RVs, and things that I think, the fire marshals and you're all doing a good job of coming in and working with it. But I don't think that is something that's not appreciated by the folks in the neighborhoods and the folks that are going to be voting on this. And we shouldn't be scared about it. The Santa Rosa Police Department, Santa Rosa City, the Violence Prevention Network, we've set a nationwide standard moving the arc of how we do police enforcement towards neighborhood policing. We've given presentations where people cite us for that I'm aware of. So, does that mean that we can do more? Yes, but I wouldn't be afraid to toot our own horn on how much we've changed that conversation. My one question for you, Scott, and for the staff is, what is going to be your process for engaging on developing funding formula recommendations to the council, and what efforts will be taken to make sure this doesn't turn into a Christmas tree ballot initiative, and that we're staying focused on the core mission of the funds?
Yeah, thanks, Member Caston, for that, for those comments and question. So the direction we've been given by the city manager and just the members of the council so far is to just present as is, right, what the current 40-40-20 allocations are. But the reality is the council makes the final call. But that's what we're going into when we go into July. But certainly all the community feedback we're going to gather and hear, we're presenting that along with that. So those are kind of the two tracks. But yes, the allocations could change, and that may be dependent on what the council wants to do on the length of tax, right? But certainly that could change, or the amount. So it may all just, there might be a trickle down effect depending on what decision they make first on that. But yeah, so right now we're talking just on the 40-40-20, but certainly welcome to hear other ideas.
Thank you. That was all I had.
Great. I think Manta, it's your turn, and then Yvette after Manta. Is that right? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bailey, Captain Cregan, everyone else who's attending this meeting. Thank you for your service that you all provide to the community. My question is in line with the previous member, and I think Member Minor touched, Vice Chair Minor touched on this. We talked about the funding formula, right? I think our member just mentioned, he just asked, what's the funding formula recommendation? What was maybe you can answer this, Chair Bailey. What was the initial motivation for the 40-40-20 allocation, and what were the goals? What was the mission associated with that ratio of allocated funding?
That's a very good question, and at the time, I believe it was something that was decided by the city council, and I remember my recommendation, it was higher for gang prevention efforts because that's where my heart was at the time. That's where not that I have anything against police or fire, I love you all, and I'm grateful for your services, but that's where I was thinking. And plus I thought that we needed to support the nonprofits who do the kind of work that the city wasn't doing back then. We didn't know how to do gang prevention services. We were brand new. We were learning how to do all that. So my understanding, it was a council decision, and that's all I know. Maybe someone else can answer that question. We can look. I can make some phone calls though. I will do that. I'll make some phone calls.
So that would be we would continue on with the same allocation despite knowing the initial motivation.
Well, I think well, go ahead. Someone else answer because go ahead.
Right. Yeah, Chair Bailey and members of the committee. So I was here back at that time as was Ellen. And while I did work in the periphery of this. So I don't have a direct answer for the motivation that went behind it, but I do know that just as with now, is that a lot of that is based off of community sentiment that's coming in either from polling or from or these meetings. We did an exhaustive amount of community outreach at that time. And so all of that information goes into forming the council's direction on how to do that split. So obviously, as we went out in our first round of polling, and then we'll do a second round of polling, but what the council wanted going out when we went out in October to do the initial poll was to find out what the Santa Rosa voters wanted in terms of that split. They specifically stayed away from dictating it. What they did was they said, let's find out what the community wants, go do polling, and then come back to us with a recommendation based on what we think can pass. And again, as Scott has mentioned before, what it may come back is that we that 2022 isn't the time to go or whatever. That's still out in the future, that we have to go through this process to figure out where our best path is to pass this renewal. So that is you're bringing up an excellent point about that. I do think that some of the things that the staff has talked about already of enhancing those services in both police and fire, and beginning really the nexus of a gang prevention, gang and violence prevention function that then morphed into what we have now in our violence prevention came from that. Those were all of what we heard loud and clear from the community at the time, is that we need to enhance these services. We need to go in this direction. So it's very well that the community may come back now and say, look, we want more upstream investment, and we're willing to pay more to get that.
Yeah, so with that being said, that was one of my concerns. Is in the community, when I hear people conversations about this topic, they tend to go with wanting more percentages going to prevention or even to parks and recs, and less going to the police, and leaving the fire department the same. So I think when you start to do the community engagement piece, you begin to hear a different narrative. So when they did the polling, what was the percentages like as far as people of color that they polled? Because I do believe you would get different results when you're doing the polling if there was a half of people of color. We have a huge Eritrean population here in Santa Rosa. So we have some big populations here in Santa Rosa that I feel like may not have had an opportunity to be heard in that polling process. And so I just want the city to be very careful moving forward, that they're being very intentional and making sure that they're reaching out to the surging populations we have here. We do have a huge Latinx population, but there are some other ethnically and culturally populations that is coming up in our community that needs to be heard in this process. So I just want you to be very careful when doing polling and doing surveys that my population in particular is being heard in this process, because I guarantee those percentages will look different if you was to hear from people of color.
Yeah, I think those points are all well taken, Vice Chair Minor. I think the public opinion polling is just one tool in our toolbox. And so we want to have a robust process to hear from folks. That's the second reason why we're here, right? One is to communicate with groups about what's been going on. Obviously, this group knows very well because you sit on the Oversight Committee, but the Rotaries, other groups may not be as familiar with Measure O. But then the second main piece is to hear from all of you. So again, I think, if you have ideas on who we should be talking to, groups, leaders, please contact us because all options are on the table. We are open to sit down with everybody. And that's our role here is to hear from all of you. And as CFO Alton mentioned, that's going to help inform, what we talk to the council about what we're hearing. And hopefully with these council town halls as well, that are going to be in person, and not virtual, that they're going to hear that too. So it's really important for us that we have that link with community members and especially members of this committee, because you're so familiar with Measure O itself.
Scott, I have another question in addition to the 40-40-20 and the polling. Like what you Alan says it's going to be a part of the process, the polling. Yvette, Vice Chair Yvette Minor mentions that there may be the representation, right? May not be there. How was the polling done initially? And because technology has changed so dramatically, what is your strategy of polling right now? What is you say you have a plan to generate the poll, to take the polls. What is your current experimental design? What is your current approach strategy? Is it through social media? And do you have already any plans to reach out to the different folks who represent different ethnic groups in our community?
Scott, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that. I mean, that's a great question for Charles or Brian Godby, and because they did those polls. I know that they use a number of different methods. They don't just rely on phone polls. It's also text and I believe email as well. So they try to hit all of that and be as advanced as possible from that. They do look at registered voters. So it's that. I know at the polling that they did in October, they had a very good sample. So they got a good response, was able to develop a good sample size to have a good margin of error with it. So from those standpoints, I don't have the crosstabs in front of me, so I can't tell you what the breakdown of the demographics were. Sorry, I don't have it. I didn't expect that question. Obviously going forward, but it's that same type of methodology. And again, to be really clear, as Scott mentioned, this is one element of the tools that we can use. There's a whole bunch of different tools that go into this, right? So you do opinion polling, and that's normal, what you would do with any ballot measure. But you do the community outreach to not only to be able to educate the public, but there are other things that can be done that's outside of normal city staff that could be done to also help with voter outreach and increasing your base of voter support. So these are, you know, we're at an initial step in moving forward this. I think this is the first meeting that we're having in this before we get into town halls and other meetings. So your points are extremely well taken, and I think we're headed down the path you're looking for us to go. At least it sounds that way to me. So sorry, Scott, I kind of went a little bit longer than I thought I would there, but.
Thank you, Alan.
No,
Scott?
Alan, yeah, that's all great points. I think, you know, just to underscore, you know, this is our first formal presentation to any group. We wanted to come to you first. You have the expertise sitting on this oversight committee, and you have relationships in the community and your community leaders. So that's part of why we want to hear from you. And if you, again, have ideas, thoughts, contact us, let us know. We're happy to have further discussions. Again, this is really step one. We have a marathon to run until July, but that's why we're suited up to do this. And we're here to ensure, because the council will ask, right? Their first question to us is going to be, well, who did you talk to? You know, and what were you hearing? So I guess those are the first two questions they'll ask. So we have to be able to make sure that we have good answers. And so that's part of why, you know, the public opinion polling is just one piece of that. There's these town halls, the community presentations, our social media. We're also doing direct mail, and that actually will land in mailboxes probably next week, and that's going to be fully bilingual. So all of those materials will be in English and Spanish as well. So we're just trying to find opportunities to reach the community in whatever way they receive information. And so we're happy to work with anybody to try to make that happen. And just one other thing that Alan touched on, you know, we as a city, there are restrictions by law on what we can spend money on to communicate with the public for a potential ballot measure and a public education initiative like what we're talking about. And one of those restrictions is that we can only communicate in a mass way to registered voters. So that's why we have other options that we're talking about, like this Zoom meeting right now, the other town halls we're doing. Those are obviously open to anybody, to any member of the public. And so that's just the nuance there for some of those communications.
Thank you, Scott. I think, Andrew, you've had your hand up, but before I let you speak, I just wanted to I remembered something that happened in the context for having a new sales tax measure for Measure O in 2004. Part of what happened is that I know the city of Oakland and the city of San Francisco both had similar kinds of sales tax measures on their ballots. And one passed and the other didn't. And the one that passed, the message that we got from the one that passed, I think it was Oakland's that passed, is that they included gang prevention intervention services in their ballot measure. It wasn't just police and fire, that they included a whole different, and the city of Santa Rosa took note of that and paid attention and added it to ours. I can get more detailed information about that if you need to, but I'm really pretty clear that that's what happened. So we have to look at the whole context of where we are now, the entire context of what's going on in our city now. And you know, when I hear Scott Westrup, the chief, talks about, you know, the need for buildings, we need more fight. You know, we lost one up at Fountain Grove, and so, you know, we have those needs. And then when they hear, you know, John, Captain, are you captain or are you the acting chief?
I'll step into that role of acting chief on May 2nd.
Okay, well then I'm going to call you captain then, just for a little bit longer.
That's
but
fair.
You know, when you talk about the needs at the time, or the time that one of the big changes that's taken place has been these street races that are happening that are so dangerous. And so, you know, the context has changed some, and yet the services are, well, the context has changed a lot actually in 20 years. And that's what we have to hear from the public, what's really important now to them right now. So thank you for all the things you're already starting to do. And I'm really glad to hear, it sounds like you're making a concerted effort to reach out throughout the whole community. And now, Andrew, I believe you've had your hand up the longest, and then we'll go to Nick.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if anyone was aware, are there any other new sales tax measures being put on the ballot in November? Because, you know, that could affect, you know, the voters. this sales tax is not really a new one, it's a renewal. And I think probably that's what helped Measure M for the county on transportation, was that people were not getting an increase in the sales tax. They're just renewing it for the future and using it for different purposes. So are there any perceived or new ones potentially coming up in November to your knowledge?
Yeah, thanks, Committee Member Smith. And you certainly raise a good point about that. And that's, I think, one of the considerations the council will have to make. Is it a straight renewal or is it a different tax? As of right now, we are aware of one other sales tax measure, which is being circulated by signature gatherers, by a community organization focused on early education, infant care, and preschool. So I believe it's called Our Children's Initiative. It's a lot of stakeholders are involved in that countywide. So that would be a countywide measure. But as of right now, that's the only other sales tax that we're aware of that would impact the city of Santa Rosa. As Committee Member Caston mentioned earlier on the fire tax, there is discussion that a county fire tax potentially would go in 2024. It would not go this year. So that's another consideration the council will have to make, certainly, if there's other competing interests or a lack of competition for November.
Okay. Member Nick Caston, did you have some more comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of things that were said. And, I think I'm really glad that we're here at the beginning of the process for you to probably provide the context and both probably the guardrails also for this conversation. I would encourage and hope that when we're talking with the community, we're doing it in more of a qualitative way instead of a quantitative way. When we talk about, do I want 40% going to this department or 20% or 30%, that's not real to people. And that probably showed through in the polling. Godby's a very renowned, very reputable pollster. They've been doing work for decades in the state. But when we're talking about it, it's more about, well, what do you want to have? And if we're making a choice to increase or decrease funding from somewhere, then there's also the, what are we going to lose? Do we lose response times? Do we gain response times? Do we have someone there? And so I think it's important that we don't just say, hey, where do you want the money to go in a percentage level, but we're saying it on a, qualitative, this is what this means level, and what are the types of services. People may be, and I find this when I'm talking with folks in my community, that people may be talking about wanting funding to go somewhere or go to things that they don't think about as being connected with any given department. Unless you're like us and Denzians of the city, you don't necessarily know which city employee is doing the thing that you like in the community. So I just wanted to say that. And I wanted to share a personal story, and it's one that's kind of, this measure has been a part of my life in several different ways. I was on the community advisory board back in 2004, and got to see the community outreach that went into that effort as someone who's one of the youngest members of that committee at the time, if not the youngest. But in 2012, I had an experience in downtown when we had the transit station located in front of City Hall, and we were doing the renovation of it. And I was, assaulted while walking in between and behind the parking garage to the state building, which is where my office was at the time. And I was very fortunate that a sworn ABC officer happened to be parking at the time and was able to radio in to the downtown patrol unit with the city, which was funded by this initiative. And those officers were there because a sales tax existed. And I'm not the only person in the city that's had that. We saw 20,000 calls, I believe it was, from the police department last year of folks who are being helped. So I don't think we should discount the fact that there's a lot of good that is happening there while we continue to work on increasing the neighborhood policing, increasing the connection to the community, and increasing our violence prevention efforts. So I just encourage everyone to recognize recognize that our police department is not the national police department, and that they've been doing really good work for many years that have helped people, including myself, in times.
Thank you, Nick. I'm glad you're okay. I had one thought when you were talking about that or before. Oh, one thing that happened, or I've heard talk about, and I can't remember where since this whole process started, is that there was some polling done. It may have been when the pollsters called me. Was it where that there was an option offered to go to a 1/2 cent sales tax instead of a 1/4 cent? And I wondered if that was still something that was being considered, because it would solve a lot of issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the options that the council will certainly consider, is if the amount changes, and that will be part of the feedback that we receive from community members and groups. Certainly that kind of calculation is just on a policy level that they'll have to figure out if it's a straight renewal or they're seeking an increase, and how that may affect the allocation of what police, fire, and violence prevention receives.
Great, thank you. And then I want to be sure everyone's had a chance to say what they want to say or ask what they need to ask, but I had a thought about, it would be, who would we send information to directly? It's just a kind of a, housekeeping thing. I have a list of places where I'd like to see you contact the community. So who do we send that to?
You could send it directly to me. And so, I can put my email here in the chat for everybody as well. So people can send it by email, or they can call me. So I can certainly provide that information to the committee.
Thank you. And are there other members who have questions or comments?
Quick.
Hi, Elias. I didn't see your hand up, so I'm glad to see it.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks for the great presentations. Just to provide some feedback to the folks doing collecting feedback. But yeah, personally, just in my personal opinion, I think the 20% is absolutely ridiculous. And just for the fact where we are currently right now, I hope speaks to the importance of change, that we're all going to be taking part in to help, heal our community. So that's just my feedback to give back to you. And I think one thing that struck me when you brought up registered voters, obviously we should all know, I think there's like 38,000 like undocumented people we have in Sonoma County. I think that's like the Public Policy Institute of California reported. And as we know, people of color in Sonoma County largely are unregistered, So that's something to take in consideration, not just because they'll be voting for or against, but because they have a large sway, just to think about, a lot of people sometimes just vote for, their undocumented friend, just to be like, oh, what would you do? So that's something to take a part in. And then I think last thing is just, I definitely believe that percentage, like just to echo what Vice Chair Minor said, and what our brother Manza said, I think those numbers are, the time has came and it's gone. So I think that's definitely what's going to happen once you begin to do those polls. But I just wanted to give you that feedback, and I'll definitely reach out to talk about other feedback that I may hear from the community. But yeah.
No, appreciate your comments, and certainly the feedback loop is ongoing. So even after tonight, if you hear of something later on, please let us know, or send folks our way, or even help promote the town halls we're going to start having, starting next week on April 14th and then April 19th. Those will be the only 2 in April, but like I said earlier, we'll have additional ones in May and June.
Great, then I think we can move to public comment, unless there's someone else on the committee. Am I not seeing a hand raised? I think we're okay.
I have my hand up. One last thing. I promise.
It's okay.
For going forward, we'll where the Measure O committee get updates in this process? What is that going to look like as far as moving forward? Are we one and done? I think for us as committee members and going back to our constituents, if you will, I would like to have updated information so that I'm abreast of the information, and when I'm going back into the community, I can speak intelligently about that, about Measure O. So are we one and done, or will there be further updates going forward?
We can certainly come back to you all, maybe in May or June, and have another update, and share any materials we developed, or and again, a calendar of events. Happy to provide that later on. And the council meeting tentatively will be July 12th. So certainly we'll want to come back to you all before that. So certainly in advance of that meeting.
Thank you. The other, I think we should clarify, and I think the city attorney's listening in on this meeting too, so she might have a better way of saying it than me, but this committee, we are treated in some ways like city employees. And so during this time, we can educate, but we cannot promote a perspective. Is that right? Am I saying it correctly? Is Sue Gallagher listening? So that we don't step outside our lane here. Okay, Sue?
Hi, yes. Hi, thanks. Yes, you'll be governed by the same restrictions as any city employee or official in terms of what your participation is at this point. There will be some flexibility going forward if you let me clarify, you cannot use any city resources to undertake any advocacy. If you want to take advocacy on your own time and in your individual capacity, you are free to do that. Okay. But you cannot use you cannot be using your position or any city resources, but otherwise you're free.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
And if I think I have a copy of the policy and I can send it out to everyone just to keep as a reminder as we go forward.
And I do have, through the chair, I do have kind of do's and don'ts. And if you would like me to send that, it's just a very short, concise sheet. I'm happy to send that to this group as well.
That would be great. Thank you.
Will do.
Okay, so then let's go to, I'm going to make a call for public comments. This is a public comment section for the Measure O update and public education outreach. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in by telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Do we have any members from the public?
I am seeing no hands raised.
Okay, great. Well, then I think it's time to bring our meeting to a close. I want to thank all the departments and the presenters for all the information. I really appreciate it. I think you've done a tremendous amount of work to get us to this place, and it is a lot of work here. It's going to be quite a race to get this ready by July. We have a lot of work to do, and I really appreciate all that you've done to get us to where we are already. So thank you for that. And I think we should adjourn the meeting. And it is now 5:24. Thank you very much, everyone, and the members of the committee and all the staff. Thank you.